Welcome to Legal Connect, where each week we sit down with top lawyers to demystify the process of hiring and working with legal counsel in today's world. From navigating the legal system to understanding your rights, our expert guests will provide valuable insights and tips for anyone facing a legal challenge. So tune in, take notes, and join us as we explore the ins and outs of the legal profession. A quick disclaimer, anything discussed in the podcast is general tips and advice, not formal legal advice. Always consult a lawyer. So hello everybody and welcome back to the Legal Connect podcast. I'm very excited about today's guest. Today we have Essa. He's a lawyer, an emerging companies lawyer at Renno Co in Toronto, Ontario. And what he does is he works with startups and growth stage companies. He represents corporations, both startups, medium size, on a variety of corporate and commercial matters. And he works in some very interesting areas, including blockchain, Web3 companies, fintech companies, and even things like medium tech companies and crypto exchanges. So I think he's going to have a lot of interesting insights to share today about that Web3 kind of crypto space if you are interested in seeing where the future of that is going, especially as it pertains to the legal field. And just excited to learn from you today, Essa. So maybe you can just kind of kick us off with telling us a bit about your background, how you got into law, and then specifically how you kind of made this shift into working with emerging companies.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me. So starting with law, I guess, I used to work in the fintech space before I actually went to law school. I did my undergrad at York. During that entire time, I worked in the fintech space, sort of like part-time, full-time sort of thing. And then eventually I decided to apply to law school. I graduated from U Ottawa. And I had the great fortune of articling with a sports and entertainment law firm here in Toronto. After that, something possessed me to go into the world of finance, and I did that. And
why the shift? I'm curious, like from, being in sports and entertainment on its own sounds very exciting. So, why the shift to finance?
Yeah, no, I was living the dream. I mean, I really was. I think there was just like an intellectual curiosity on my part. I've always kind of been interested in the world of finance, even though I never did my undergrad in business. I kind of wanted to. But yeah, so I guess it was just that intellectual curiosity, and I kind of shifted into that, and went and worked for a company called Interactive Brokers. They're a securities broker dealer. Obviously, investment companies are very highly regulated. So I did that for a little bit. It was like quasi-law. So I wasn't strictly in the world of, legal practice, but I was sort of flirting with it. But I was doing more compliance and accounts-related work over there. And then moved into private practice and eventually found my way to Renno Co.
Nice, yeah. And how long have you been with Renno Co now?
Renno, I've been with Renno since the summer, for almost a year now.
Oh, okay. And what was it about the firm that appealed to you? Was it the work that they were doing with a lot of these, up and coming companies, or what was it that really drew you to that firm?
So there's so many things that drew me here, actually. I think the first thing, their philosophy is really, really important. They really do practice law differently, and it aligns with the way I envision the practice of law and how it ought to be. We're primarily a remote firm, so we do have offices, but there's no obligation to go into the office. I had colleagues that were working out of Milan a couple of months ago, some others were working out of Mexico, because at the end of the day, it's all about getting the work done, right? Like, you showing up into the office isn't necessarily necessary if you're not in a particular area of practice, right? And we don't. So I think litigation is probably one that might need you to come into the office a little bit more before reviewing documents and things like that. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a litigator, but the nature of our practice doesn't exactly require that, and they understand that, so they don't mandate that. So that flexibility is huge for me. The way they conduct the practice is massive. They leverage legal technologies to help with the actual practice of law. So rather than, lawyers just kind of sitting there racking our brains out, going through contracts, we actually have, certain programs to actually assist us now. And they've integrated that. Lawyers are a little bit fearful of technology in that sense, because, the running joke is that the AI is going to replace us eventually. I respectfully disagree.
I don't know how true it is. I don't think it can really ever, if anything, it would just assist you, right?
I think so. And I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So I'm optimistic about what the technology holds in the future for lawyers. And there's a lot of cool projects going on. Those are some of the things that sort of attracted me to Renno Co. And the firm itself. I've had the great pleasure of meeting with Aaron Bear and some of the other lawyers at the firm, and I just truly appreciated sort of the vision that they had, and I was excited to be a part of that.
Yeah, and it sounds like what the firm, the way they practice and the values they have seem to really match the clientele as well, right? Like if you're working with, startups in blockchain and Web3 and all these emerging spaces, you kind of need to also be on the cutting edge of technology a little bit, right?
Yeah, and we represent a lot of tech companies, both within the blockchain and Web3 space and outside of it as well. And our clients don't really care too much, for example, on like what we wear, right? Like we can show up to our meetings in t-shirts, and because they come from the tech scene, they kind of appreciate the human side of having a lawyer that doesn't seem so distant from who they are. At the end of the day, people forget lawyers are humans too, right? Sometimes we forget it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely I noticed that in the startup space a lot of times, it's definitely less intimidating if your lawyer's not showing up in a full suit, right? Because, you want someone that you can relate to, that you can feel comfortable asking your questions to when you don't know much of that legal background, right? So I think that's definitely the key for sure.
For sure. Yeah, it's huge. And there, because that human side is sort of at front and in full display, I feel, and this is obviously my opinion, I could be completely wrong, I feel clients are more inclined to be themselves as well, which makes the work much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're based in Toronto, but are most of your clientele also in Toronto, or is it kind of spread out everywhere because they also work remotely?
No, our clientele is pretty much everywhere. We're yeah, it's kind of all over the place because the internet doesn't have boundaries, right? I mean, there's several laws and privacy things that you need to kind of keep in mind when dealing with the internet. But generally speaking, we've got clients from a lot of different places that have sort of like Canada and the US as a nexus,
right?
And yeah, so it's super exciting. But we're really getting our name out there, particularly in the space. We've had clients from different countries that have some sort of connection to Canada and the US that have sort of reached out to us on a regular basis. So yeah, we're very fortunate that our clientele really does come from a lot of different places.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a nice thing. And it's nice to see more law firms that are adapting to that as well. And I think, like you said, that remote work is definitely the start of that, right? Just being able to expand your clients so much more. But just being able to also just dive into these different industries that aren't necessarily just limited to right where you're working, right?
Oh, for sure. And we work with so many brilliant people. I think that's probably one of the coolest parts of the job, right? Like beyond the fact that they're remarkably intelligent, they're also visionaries, right? They look at these problems and they're like, how can we solve this in a way that's simple, elegant, but so complex on the back end, right?
Right.
And it's a pleasure to work with a lot of our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious too, I want to kind of shift into what drove, I know you kind of started touching on what drove you to kind of work in this space or what drew you to Renno Co, but what is it specifically about working with startups or those kind of growing companies that really you find the most rewarding, that kind of fuels your passion? What is it? Like maybe, if you know somebody or like have had close friends or family that have started a business, have you started any of your own businesses?
Yeah. So of course, I've had my own businesses. I've been very, very fortunate to have had a couple of successful businesses, and I suppose what attracted me to it, and it's funny, it was kind of by chance, right? We make jokes like in law school, like things will come across your desk, and one day you just sort of becomes your area of practice, right? And that's kind of what happened to me. I wasn't super exposed to the startup world, like going through sort of the process of educating myself and, going through law school and even the undergrad. There's a lot of complexities within the startup scene that, you don't appreciate until you're in it, like really, really in it. And that's kind of what happened with me. I happened to have a client come through the door, the file came across my desk and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I kind of got lunged into everything startup. And I was like, this is really cool. So to answer your question, there's two things. Number one, it was the pace. I really enjoyed the pace of working with startups. Not to say that, larger companies are slower, but they kind of are. But that's understandable because when you're with a larger company and when you're working in larger companies, there is a little bit of bureaucracy and there's checks and balances that you usually have to go through. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. Oftentimes, there's a reason why those are in place. But with startups, the red tape's not kind of there, right? It's kind of, you go in, you do your thing, and you wear multiple different hats. So even when people are sort of asking me, what it's like to work in a startup, I tell them you're not going to be pigeonholed into one role. You're going to be, and again, this is completely dependent on, from person to person. Some people love it, some people hate it, right? Some people don't want to do that. Other people would love to have that variety. So the variety of work is another element, I guess 1A, if you would call it, in addition to the speed. But yeah, so that's definitely one element to it. I love the pace. And you sort of move from just being a lawyer to being general counsel / trusted advisor. You're not just advising on strictly legal things anymore, because you're actually participating a little bit more with the business side of things. I think I really appreciated that. So the second thing that I really appreciate about working with startups and growth companies is sort of a personal one. I love building things, and there's a special kind of satisfaction knowing that you were with this client from the beginning, and it was your sort of advice and help that, I don't want to say enabled, but aided in them building the company, because they do all that. The CEOs do all the heavy lifting, right? Like, we're just there to kind of put them in a position to succeed, and they still have to take the rest of the way. But to be a part of that building process is truly something special, and something like I find satisfactory at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think absolutely, though, even though you say the CEO does do the heavy lifting, without the strong advisors in place, it's really hard to get anywhere, right? Like, we've seen, I'm sure there's lots of startups that have failed just because they've had the wrong people around them, right?
Sure. And then when I say CEO, I mean like CEO and their team, obviously.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely rewarding being a part of something, and like just being almost being a part of their team in a sense. It's a little bit more, or it goes a little bit further than just the typical lawyer-client relationship, I would imagine, right?
Oh, for sure. Could you imagine, being there, as perhaps not necessarily a founding member, but part of the founding team of Amazon, for example, right? And actually, in funny real life story, actually, one of the founding members of Alibaba. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the massive, I don't know what you want to call it, dropshipping company, a massive logistics company, right? Yeah. Interesting enough, so the owner of the Brooklyn Nets is actually a lawyer, and he was so slight tangent, but interesting fact to sort of my point. He was, I think he went to Yale Law School, and then he worked at a law firm, one of the prestigious law firms, one of the larger ones, and then he switched into doing private equity work, right, and hard finance stuff. And he was making very good living. And then he met with the owner of Alibaba, who I guess had come in connection with the private equity firm. And I guess he was sort of taken by his sort of vision and the charm, I guess, and the idea of it. And he actually ended up becoming one of the founding members of Alibaba.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes. And so he was one of the initial, and he was paid, I think, like $500 a year or something like that. Like, his salary was ludicrously low. Yeah. And he became one of the founding members of Alibaba, and he was eventually responsible. So one of the first 17, and he was responsible for building out the entire legal and finance network within the company. So imagine, so he started there and helped build it into what it is today. So I imagine he's probably quite satisfied as well with what he's kind of built. So I appreciate that. I think a journey like that is really cool, and hopefully one I can emulate one day as well.
Yeah, I think that's the really cool thing about startups is you never know where they're going to end up, right?
Yeah.
Some of them might fail, unfortunately, or some of them might take off and become the next Amazon or the next Alibaba, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to kind of shift back to your sports background for a bit, because I really thought that with sports and entertainment, like music as well, because I know you've kind of been all over the map, and I am really curious about this. Like, you've represented athletes and national sporting organizations, is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
As well as you've had like Grammy award-winning artists and producers. So can you just share a little bit more about what that experience was like? And because I imagine it was very exciting, and it probably taught you a lot that you've carried with you into where you are now.
One of my closest mentors, and probably one of the biggest influences in my professional and to an extent my personal life. That was an incredible experience. I was very fortunate to get the position, because I can tell you most people, would die to even be in a position like that.
Oh, absolutely.
So
it's very it's a lifetime for sure, I'm sure.
Yeah. It was amazing. And so yes, we represented athletes, sporting organizations, and Grammy award-winning artists, musicians. It was a lot of fun. Again, that was a really fast-paced one as well, which is probably why I enjoyed it. My mentor told me, he said, we're in a unique position, right? We don't, we don't do just one thing. We have to be good at a lot of different things. And, you know, he said, so you'll get a file come across your desk at 8 or 9 in the morning. By 3 o'clock, you may have never seen anything like that in your life before. Never even heard of the topic. But by 3 o'clock, you have to be an expert at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be prepared. And again, like everyone has, you know, different opinions on, you know, whether that kind of life is for them. I loved it, and it was really, really cool. But I think one of the interesting things, and I know perhaps we were going to discuss this. I think one of the interesting things about that area of work is, and one of the difficult things is the bargaining position for athletes and musicians. Unfortunately, most athletes and musicians aren't incredibly wealthy, particularly when they're starting off.
It's a misconception for sure that everybody thinks that they are, right?
Yeah, and it's super unfortunate. So the biggest difficulty and biggest hurdles athletes and entertainers face is that bargaining power, right? Because they intrinsically wouldn't have it, right? There's always going to be a younger athlete, you know, ready to take your position. There's always going to be another musician that can bounce you out of, you know, that record deal, right? Theoretically, from the producer's standpoint or, you know, coach's standpoint, right? You've got a handful of like exceptionally talented, you know, athletes and entertainers, but you know, from their viewpoint is you're replaceable, right? And, you know, us being, you know, representing the other side of that, representing the athletes, representing the entertainers, you know, our position, you know, is to say, look, yes, there is this gap in bargaining power between the two of you, but that doesn't mean you forfeit everything. Don't give up all your rights. And that very much, unfortunately, had happened a few times before they had come to us. Because the reality is lawyers we're not super affordable, right? Comparatively, you know, as a service provider, we try to the best of our ability. But for the average person, you know, particularly when they're starting out, that's an investment. But I think it's a good investment. So there is this access to justice issue within that space as well, and that's very important to me. And so, being someone who grew up as an athlete, you know, that sort of representation was very, very important to me and sort of resonated with me. So I really, really loved the work I was doing. You know, we were trying to level a playing field between these, you know, multi-billion-dollar record companies. You know, I don't want to say trying to take advantage of, but, you know, putting these artists in a position where they really shouldn't have been.
Right.
You know, so being able to sort of restore that, you know, not only for entertainers, but athletes as well, and give them the opportunity to go out, do what they do so well, do what they do best, and let us worry about sort of this legal technical jargon that we really wish they didn't have to deal with.
Yeah, I definitely see it as a good investment for them, because even if they're able to, you know, maybe they're going to have to take up some debt or whatever it is to be able to get the lawyer up front, but if it's worth it to get a much larger contract or a much better bargaining deal, right, it's definitely going to pay off in the long run. Yeah, even if it's a little bit of a cost up front, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any, like, I guess, like any like tips, just kind of an aside, you know, when it comes to like bargaining? I can imagine, like, I'm imagining this kind of like smaller team of lawyers, you know, like kind of startup-y lawyers going up against, you know, a big legal team of a record company or something like that. How, like, was that intimidating? Like, how do you even, you know, go about, like, any tips for like going into those situations or negotiations? I'm just more curious than anything.
Yeah, so there's two things. So first of all, my mentor always used to say, he said, listen, you've got to bring your A game every day because you're going against the best in the world, right? And he was absolutely right. There's some brilliant lawyers I'd met through the practice, and they were really, really at the top of their field. So you really have to spend time in perfecting your craft. But the second element to that is, and this is my thing, and something I've carried with me, is to never negotiate from a position of weakness. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very powerful mantra. It's something I tell my clients whenever we go into a negotiation. It's something I learned there. And I think it's critically important to understand your position, your principles, and understand what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. And I think that really, because if you have that and you have the foundation, you can craft arguments around that. You know, although you're not going into court, you're not suing people, you still have to be able to craft, you know, arguments about, okay, why should we give you this, right? Be able to justify it. And I think if you can justify it reasonably, you put yourself in a much better position. And, you know, you don't want to automatically just start like, hey, listen, the door's over there. I can take my talents elsewhere. Like, we'll take. We obviously don't want that.
The last move, probably.
You don't want to keep that up front, but that always is an option, and you have to. It's a client by client decision, but I think that's critically important. Understand your client's position, understand the leverage you have, and use it to the best of your ability.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I was just kind of curious about that. I think anybody, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're hiring a lawyer or just want to learn how to be a better negotiator, I think that's great advice.
Absolutely. Next time you're going to buy a new car, you're set.
Yeah, very transferable skills. Absolutely. So kind of returning back to your main work now, back to, the work that you're doing currently, startups and kind of some of these emerging industries. We're hearing more and more now about crypto, blockchain. Like, these are the things that I think people, they're still so almost like conceptual or foreign that we don't even know where to start, right? So I guess my question for you is, what are some of the big legal considerations or maybe issues that people should consider if they are looking to get into that space, whether it's, to start a business in that space or whether it's to invest in that space? Not that I'm asking you to give investment advice or anything like that.
Of course.
Legal considerations for anybody that's just interested in learning more about some of these up and coming industries.
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
It's a heavy one.
Because there's a lot going on. Like, even we have to really be on our A game just to kind of keep up with all the regulatory changes. They're changing every day.
Yeah. Who do you use as sources to, keep current? Like, how can you, are there certain, There's like legal bulletin boards and like updates that we receive. Like, for example, the Ontario Securities Commission or the Canadian Securities Administrators, Canadian Securities Association, they'll post, bulletins or memos, on new regulations or regulatory decisions that have come out. So we do get those. A recent one that came out gave CTPs, crypto trading platforms, 30 days to become compliant to some new regulations. That's quick, right? Yeah.
It was a really short turnaround. This is great business for us. But the problem is it's really difficult for the clients, right? You kind of have to change, sometimes you have to change your business model and change your offerings and things. So it does become a little bit difficult. So that's how we keep up with it. We're fortunate that there are updates, but even then it's a lot, right? Because it's not just it's just not the Canadian side of things, it's the US side of things. And then, we do have some work in Europe that we look at. And we have to kind of stay on top of, just because, regulators kind of sometimes look at each other and sort of mirror each other. So we kind of watch the markets to see how things are being regulated everywhere. And I think that makes us better lawyers, because then we understand, because as much as it is, there is this local element to it, there's a global element to it as well. And I think we need to be appreciative of that fact. And we've had, many, I don't want to get too technical, but there's been, legal issues that have gone cross-border where we had to be, apprised of, UK law as well as Bulgarian law and some other random.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to sort of be aware of it, without giving advice on that side of things, but understand the Canadian consequences of that, right? Or the US consequences if we're representing on the US side, because we do have a US branch as well. That's how we stay up to date with things. On the other side of that, sort of getting into the industry, hire a lawyer.
Always the best advice. Yeah,
that's probably a good starting point, because it's becoming increasingly regulated. So I'm gonna answer this in a couple of different ways. So I'll start with the crypto element of things, right? Mm-hmm. When you're going into a crypto marketplace and you want to invest in crypto at a very personal level, understand what you're investing in, right? That's free advice. I'm not giving investment advice, but I think it's pretty good advice. Generally, just understand.
Absolutely, you should definitely invest in it. And I think lots of people that do invest in crypto don't have an understanding, so it's even more important.
Yeah, and that's problematic, right? Because you have to be prepared to lose. You have to be prepared to lose everything if you're going to do that. Because if you're not understanding where your returns are going to come from, then it becomes increasingly problematic, not only for you, but also for the market. Because then when the moment you get scared, you start pulling everything out, and that sort of hurts the market a little bit. But education is key; it really is. So, and the worst part is you don't want anyone to lose their money. Their hard-earned money for something they should have perhaps researched a little bit more, but for whatever reason didn't, and you ended up putting their money in there and ended up losing money because they didn't fully understand the project that they were investing in. Yeah. So it's really important to really understand what it is, and I encourage people to look into exactly what crypto is, right? Because it's a little bit different from the blockchain. It's connected to the blockchain. Crypto generally should be or is connected to blockchain, but you need to understand exactly what it is, right? It's not. Some people are treating it as a currency. Personally, I believe it behaves more like an asset, and I don't want to get overly technical with that. But these are important distinctions to understand because there's microeconomic consequences to that. So you want to understand exactly what you're investing in. And so once you understand that, then you can start going into the crypto market and engaging a little bit more. But really understand what exactly it is. And they're interconnected to an extent, right? Crypto, Web3, blockchain, there's a little bit of intersectionality between all of them. Web3 is so Web3 and blockchain are really fascinating in my opinion, arguably more so than crypto. And I'll explain why. So crypto is usually associated with a project, right? Yes. It's usually the development of a blockchain or something on top of, it's usually the development of a blockchain or some sort of blockchain project or Web3 project where these tokens are sort of issued, right? Ethereum is a good example of that. It is a blockchain that has applications being developed on top of it. So it's kind of like a foundational, which is where it derives its value from. And Bitcoin just came out with something recently. They have something NFT related, and I'm not going to get into that, called ordinals.
That's another can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. There's values to NFTs though, and I'll explain. I'm going to speak to that in a second. But because I think that'll be really interesting. I think people need to understand what they are and why you should care. So obviously blockchain has certain different developments. There's what it really solves is for a lot of different industries is the trust issue. There's a bit of trust issue. I'll give you an example. JP Morgan, who was it's a major bank in the US and internationally, they were really against blockchain like a year and a half ago. They said crypto is a scam, all of this sort of fun stuff. And they have an entire branch dedicated to crypto and blockchain research called JP Morgan Onyx. Yeah. And they
changes. Hey.
Yeah, it's funny how much a year can change things. So they have this thing called JP Morgan Onyx, and that's sort of like their research development and implementation arm. Specifically blockchain Web3 related, and they did a foreign exchange between a couple of different currencies, and it was between U.S., Singapore, and Japanese currencies, if I remember correctly. And usually it would take about 2 to 3 days for the entire transaction to occur. Well, they did it on the blockchain, and it only took them 3 hours.
Oh my, yeah.
Yeah, and they effectively removed the clearinghouse from the equation, which is usually the stalling point. Because of that, they were able to implement technology. So people are doing remarkable things with the actual technology. And if you understand the use case for that, then you'll understand why it seems so brilliant. But for people like yourself and myself, or maybe not you, but for me, I'm mostly going to see only what's happening in the front end. So a really good and well executed piece of technology, in my opinion. And this is how it becomes mainstream in my view as well, by the way, and this is, sort of tying into Web3, is we're going to be using it, but we won't even know what's powering it. It's going to be completely on the back end, right? When we turn our computer, most of us don't know how it works. We don't understand how, the circuits are working, what's triggering what. When we go onto the internet, we don't know how the nodes are operating, right? We just go to Google, we do our thing, right?
We just want the result we're trying to get, right?
Yeah, because we don't care. We really don't care. Listen, just let me do my thing. Let me use it. And I think the blockchain Web3 sort of technologies and interfaces are going to be like that. We're going to see it working on the back end. All this technical ability and brilliance is going to be on the back end of it, and the front end is going to be remarkably user friendly. Yeah. That's how you're going to make. That's how it's going to be adopted, in my view. That's going to lead to mass adoption when people don't even realize that they're using it. So I do believe that will be coming soon, within the next few years, given the rate at which people are sort of advancing this technology. And the people who, and I should say the builders that are building all of that on the back end, but making the front end incredibly user-friendly, are the ones that are going to be the most successful, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Particularly if it's consumer-facing, right? Some people go business to business, but that's completely depends on the business model, right? Yeah, and now just switching into the NFT space, that's an exciting one because they had it blew up like 6 months ago or 8 months ago or something like that.
It was huge. It was everywhere. I haven't heard as much about it lately, but that's because I'm just not looking at the right news channels.
No, it's dead quiet right now. It picks up here and there, but I think what's important is to understand what an NFT is, right? So I'm going to ignore the fundamental base of it, but what its use case is, right? So some people value it for the art, right? And there is interesting, fun fact, there's certain tax treatments that art gets, like regular art, favorable tax treatments that they get in the Income Tax Act in Canada, which is why wealthy people buy art.
It's not covered under that same. They're not covered under that.
I personally don't know, but I wonder if an argument could be made for that, and that would be interesting.
So. I think eventually we could, right?
Yeah, it would be interesting if that was the case. But there are people that see value in it for the art in itself. Personally, I'm not a fan of dogs pixelized that I can barely see.
Yeah.
To each its own. But I think the real value in NFT isn't the actual NFT itself. It's what's behind the NFT. And what I mean by that is I'm specifically referring to the community behind it.
Yes, that's huge.
I think that is the true value of it. So, and there's another one actually that came to mind that I'll bring up in a second. But I think that's really the true value, because what that NFT does, it gets you into Discord servers, community events, and if in those events and that community you have particularly influential people or particularly brilliant people, intelligent people, industry leaders, you automatically have just become a part of a think tank by virtue of that NFT.
That's really interesting. I've never heard anybody describe it that way before, but it's so true.
Yeah, and that's the way I look at it, really, because I don't think the value is just by virtue of the art. Sure, if you want to buy it for the art, go for it. But I think if you're building a community in the back end, and the people of that community are really either very focused to a particular profession, or maybe high achieving, or maybe you guys just are all gamers, whatever. But the value of NFT, I think personally, is tied directly to that. People are going to have their views on what they perceive the value to be, but to me, I think gaining access to those communities, which are in effect exclusive, because you can't get in there without the NFT.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at something like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, right?
Yeah.
With remarkably influential people owning pieces. I think Stephen Curry from the NBA owns a piece, and some other very, very influential people, and they're all part of the same community now. It was very hey, okay, I want to connect with this guy. I have a business idea. Let me shoot Steph Curry a message because he's part of my. I doubt it works like that, but but to be clear, when you've got a $5 million NFT in your hand, you probably can make that call.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like an equalizer in a sense. It reminds me, back in the day, you had to be maybe a member of an exclusive golf club or a country club or something to access these people, or some kind of business association. But now it's just being in this Discord server, right? Yeah,
and it's fascinating. Is that so that's the other part I was going to actually mention, and I'm happy you mentioned that, Rochelle. The golf club membership analogy is actually very appropriate because a lot of large companies are using NFTs as membership, not membership cards, but membership access tokens, right? And they have rewards that are associated with that. So a few big players, for example, Starbucks is one. It's funny. So at a conference I went to this summer. There was what he calls himself. He calls himself a recovering lawyer. He hasn't been a lawyer for a few.
I love that.
Yeah, he hasn't been a lawyer for a few years, and based on what he was telling me, he was a brilliant one. Like, he didn't tell me he was brilliant. Like, I'm telling you, he was brilliant.
Yeah.
He was doing some very, very technical intellectual property stuff, and you need to be of a special class to do that, in my opinion. So far beyond my capabilities. So he did that, and he was working with like IBM and large companies like that, and he actually ended up stepping off and starting an NFT membership / royalties program. And part of his he's got some massive clients, Starbucks being one of them.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're looking to integrate the technology into their existing membership programs.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So you're going to walk around with your Starbucks thing that might have like a personalized, I don't know, maybe some sort of image with, on your Starbucks app that you're going to use. And it's going to, there's going to be rewards associated with that. And it's personalized, very specific to you. And I'm not sure what the value of that is and how they're going to integrate it. But, I'm theorizing here, which is a really cool endeavor. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited to kind of see where some of these technologies go. And the possibilities really are endless, right? And you've motivated me to go and buy some NFTs now. So.
Yeah, no, do your research. Do your research and make sure you know what they're connected to, for sure. But yeah, I've got another friend who actually opened up his sort of own NFT project, and it was just like a bunch of engineers. And
wow.
Yeah, so they were just a bunch of engineers, and when you get a bunch of them together in one room, some ideas start flying, and who knows what happens, but they all there's a lot that can happen when you get a lot of like-minded as well as diverse minds together in the same room. One of my NFTs gives me access to special access to the talks from Gary Vee, for example.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So he speaks specifically to these NFT holders, which I am a part of.
Yeah.
So it's really cool, and he'll have like an AMA section as well where we can directly access him through that. Well, I mean, it gets uploaded on a platform, but we can ask the questions through there, which is really cool because it allows us an opportunity to sort of interact with people we ordinarily wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, no, I really like this this whole framing of it as this membership ticket or token almost that gets you into all these access or spaces.
That's the way I look at it. I mean, maybe people just like buying it for the art. I don't know.
I think especially like the business people, like the people, like lawyers, business people, finance people are thinking about it more as who can I connect with through this? Like if you are someone that's very strategic, right? So.
Absolutely. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah. And I also wonder, just when it comes to the legal side with some of these community builders or people that are starting off these projects, I imagine, if they don't expect anything much of it, they create their NFT and then suddenly it blows up and becomes this big community, suddenly they're almost responsible for this community, right? So are there legal implications there that they're bringing in lawyers to deal with or manage?
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's a ton of stuff going on there. So one of the interesting ones, so to your point, sometimes that does happen.
Yeah.
But I find more often than not, it's they create this and they create it with the intent of building a community. That's usually when it's more successful.
Yeah.
That has happened before, but unfortunately, the consequences of that is that sometimes people just abandon the project altogether, and that's super unfortunate. The term in the sort of NFT world is called a rug pull. So people build up this project, they just sell it, but there's no actual intrinsic value underlying the product, right? Underlying the NFT, like in the way I described it to you.
Right.
And that's unfortunate because it's effectively a scam. Some people get scammed, and this is why we need to be careful of this sort of space. And I say this tongue in cheek because regulation isn't always better, but sometimes it's necessary. But how do you regulate something? And this is what the regulators are struggling with as well. How do you regulate something that's borderless, right? I think last year New York tried to make rug pulling illegal. How do you enforce that? Right, when the buyer's coming out of say Singapore, for example, how do you enforce the fact that they created a project, people in the U.S. bought it, and then that's it? How are you going to enforce that? Right?
Yeah,
it's very difficult, and it's something I think the regulators are wrestling with, and perhaps it's something I haven't turned my mind to enough. But it is very difficult. So that's one sort of unfortunate circumstance that we've seen happen, and I guess the legal remedy to that would be you put whoever owns it on notice. But if it's outside of Canada and the U.S., I mean, how much can you really enforce it, right? So that's why So that's in the NFT space at the very least. As far as the blockchain space and the sort of crypto space, we have to be very cognizant of the laws in Canada and the U.S. Because whether crypto is constituted as a security is still a matter of debate. And there's a very specific legal test that's applied to it, and there's a big case in the U.S. right now in front of the courts between the SEC, the major securities regulator in the U.S., and Ripple, to determine whether it constitutes a security or an investment contract. And just so for everyone's benefit, the consequences of that are being constituted as a security or being deemed to be a security tells you who you're going to be regulated by. It's the difference between being regulated by a securities commission or some other part of the market, right? So, and securities regulators tend to have a higher standard, and you have to be very, very careful because there are fines and in the U.S. possibly jail time. So you have to be very, very careful of these sort of regulations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be probably beneficial in many circumstances, especially for some of these new crypto things where, people are getting scammed because maybe it never, suddenly the founder just disappears. I've been watching too many Netflix documentaries, as you can tell. I think having it regulated in that way would probably definitely give some people maybe more peace of mind and encourage more people to invest in it, because right now it's still viewed as very risky, right?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to research, right? I think you'd be better off investing in companies. In blockchain companies, because we do have Canadian companies that are developing blockchain technologies. So if you can somehow get in touch with that and somehow find a way to invest there, that would be great. But the crypto market doesn't sort of mirror the stock market. And what I mean by that is, I was fortunate. I worked for a securities broker dealer at Interactive Brokers, as we had very lightly touched on. And so I did work with the stock market, so I got to see sort of some of the intricacies, the working, how those exchanges kind of work. The crypto exchanges, or I should say the crypto market, doesn't work in the same way, not even remotely close. And one thing I tell people they have to be very, very aware of is the stock market closes at the end of the day. 5 o'clock, you cash out, you're done. You can go to sleep knowing that the market is closed, depending on the market that you're in. But with the crypto market, it doesn't close.
Yeah.
It's open all night. It's open all night, open all day. So you have to be very cognizant of the fact that when you go to sleep, people are still trading. So you don't know what's happening to your investments, your assets. So you need to be aware of that. And I'm not, again, it comes down to research. I'm not advocating for or against, but you really, really need to do your research into what you want to invest in, whether this is a market you want to play in or not.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing I want to kind of get into, because I think it's a great place to kind of steer things and wrap up, is I know that communication and clear communication and research, obviously. I'm sure that clear communication on the part of some of these companies or people that are creating these projects is also equally important. But why is that something that you value so greatly? And how can, companies or business owners, startup owners, be more transparent with their communication when it comes to the people that they're wanting to open this up to?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on the importance of it, and then the importance of it is being transparent, right? Because, and I value that greatly, because if I'm not transparent now, it's gonna get very transparent later on. And if I knew it was going that way and I didn't tell you, you're going to be upset with me. And if at the very least I can tell you in advance, look, this is what I think is going to happen, and it does happen, at least I can say, look, we knew it was going this way. Whereas if I knew it was going to happen and I didn't tell you, and you're like, why didn't you tell me? You're like, I'm stuck, right? And it puts us both in an awkward position. So for me, I'd rather front load those difficult conversations and, be upfront, because managing expectations is so critical. I'll use litigation as an example, right? Some people think they're going to sue someone and get $1 million, right? And they go to the lawyer, and the lawyer's all like, this is a great case, right? It's a slam dunk. And if a lawyer ever tells you it's a slam dunk, it's like a yellow.
That's a red flag now.
It's like a red flag, because particularly in litigation, which I've dabbled in, but I've never really gone full in on. But because it's so unpredictable, right? You can go in front of a judge who may think your argument is absolutely pathetic. You might go into negotiations and find something in disclosure that this has happened to me actually personally, where the client didn't disclose something to me, and I found out like why we were going through the documents. Like, why didn't you tell me about this?
Yeah, I guess that's communication with the client as well, right?
yeah, well, it's true. So yeah, and you'll find something completely unexpected, but that's neither here nor there. But as far as clear communication goes, you tell them outright, because if you're not going to have this difficult conversation now, you might have to have it later if things don't go your way. Mm-hmm. So be straight, be honest, and it's something I value. So if I think it's a good idea, if I think it's something plausible, and if I think it's in your budget, which is something you really need to consider as well when retaining a lawyer, it's a question I ask my clients as well. I ask them up front what their budget is, what their legal budget is, and I try to be honest with them. I'm like, listen, I can do what you're asking within that budget, or what you're asking for is too much. So maybe this is a better way we can get this done, whereas I sort of tag in here and there, and maybe you do the work, right? Like, we'll try to come up with a creative solution. So, and I find when you kind of have these conversations up front, it tempers expectations, number one, for the client. And number two, you can come up with some pretty creative solutions together when you have that conversation.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think that's definitely important, because I'm sure many of these legal, issues can escalate quite quickly. So I think it's great that you're willing to be flexible, number one, but then also just be straight up and, be like, it could evolve into this, right? Like worst case scenario.
Yeah, and I think it needs to always be spoken into if necessary, because I manage litigation. So I do, while I don't actually litigate, I'll manage it for my clients. Mm-hmm. And there's an important distinction. I don't necessarily have to go to court. I just manage the people that have to. So yeah, it's better for me. Like, I personally prefer it. So I do it across multiple jurisdictions. And the interesting thing there is, you're always doing assessments of where you are. This is where the case is going. This is how we're going to be able to resolve it. And, there's always this place where you can go and say, look, we just want to settle. But is that the best move right now? Sometimes it is. And, you advise the client. Sometimes they don't listen. But at least you said it.
Exactly.
And other times, not only for the principle, for the actual value, you have to kind of go all the way. And, this happens not only in litigation, it happens, within corporate context as well when negotiating a deal, which is really my primary area of practice. When you're having those negotiations and, you need to look for that leverage, you get together with your clients, you list out, this is the pros, this is the cons. That way you're hoping to minimize any surprises down the line.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy for sure. And I want to kind of just wrap up things in the conversation by asking you almost sort of a bit of more of a vision question of where you see, not only like your career going, but I guess what do you see for the future of, the legal, the growth of the legal field into these spaces? And then that can also include where you yourself plan on going with it.
Yeah, for sure. I like where I am right now. I think I'm on a good sort of trajectory in my view in terms of what I want to do and where I want to go. I'm very fortunate in that I get to go out and sort of try to bring clients in and have speak to clients, but would also do my legal work. So I get really the best of both worlds in my view. As far as where I see the legal profession going, I think it's inevitably going to become more automated. I think technology is going to be, it's either going to happen one or two ways. You're either going to adopt the technology or you're going to lag behind, right? Because you're going to fall behind lawyers that are adopting technology, right? That are using AI in their legal practice, that are using AI to look over their contracts and, with spot issues, cross references and things like that. And they're shaving tons of time off. Where ordinarily you would have to go do all this extra work and cross reference and we usually use hourly rates, right? But if you're going to someone who's shaving that time off by using legal tech and giving the client more value for the services that they're receiving, you're going to get caught behind. So I think inevitably, the legal tech will integrate with the profession. Is it seamless yet? No, not yet, but I think it'll get there. As for sort of the crypto blockchain Web3 world, it's going to be interesting because it's going to be very dynamic, particularly over the next year. Regulators are looking at things very, very closely right now.
Yeah, it's exciting time.
Yeah, they're looking at things very closely. They're watching what's happening in the crypto sphere right now, particularly with the follow part of FTX, which everyone sort of aware of, and that kind of shook the confidence of a lot of people in the space. Not necessarily a lot of people. Well, actually, people in the space, but also people outside of the space. And the reason I say people in the space is people who are kind of like who lost a lot of money in this, unfortunately. And confidence shook, understandably. But again, it's like the banking system when it first started out. Deposit insurance was created to instill confidence in the system, right?
Yes.
And they and eventually sort of settled into itself. So I do think there's going to be a lot of regulations coming out, which is a difficult thing, unfortunately, because and perhaps I can add at this point, the most important thing in regulation is to create laws that allow companies to succeed while protecting not only investors, but also stakeholders, but not doing it in a way that inhibits innovation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's a fine balance for sure. But I think having those protections in place will be, like you said, it'll build confidence in a lot of people. But let's just hope that they can find that extremely fine line or balance.
I hope so too.
Yeah, because that's the entire premise underlying it, right? Is freedom from regulation and just like accessibility to everybody, right? That's the whole foundational idea behind it, right?
Yeah, if you don't feel safe interacting with an ecosystem, I don't think you will.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you. That was great, Essa. And can you kind of just last thing, just give a little shout out or plug to where people can find you if they want to work with you, who should seek you out or your services, just kind of plug all your channels there.
Sure, absolutely. So my LinkedIn, easiest to find on LinkedIn. You can just take my name, plug it into LinkedIn. My profile is public. Shoot me a DM or add me up. More than happy to connect. Also on Twitter, I think it's Essa_Web3. Or you can send me a direct email at essa@rennoco.com. You can go to the Renno Co website, which we just sort of launched a very new, shiny one. So super excited there. We're also in the metaverse. If you want to come visit our offices there.
Oh, okay. Talk about that for a second. How does that? So we can go on a virtual trip to the office? Is that how it works?
Yeah, we can. We have an office. I can't remember the exact coordinates because it's a bunch of numbers. But it's in the
metaverse. I'm not sure how to navigate it. But
I think we're the first law firm in the metaverse. We actually have a building. Yeah, there's a building, and we're at the top of the building. It's a very nice sort of office. I think we have 2 floors. You can come drop by there, drop us a comment there.
It's so exciting.
Yeah. It's fun. It's pretty cool. And as far as who I service and the work I do general corporate and commercial work. What does that mean? Basically, if you need sort of any help with purchasing or selling a business or, share agreements. And from a commercial side, I think this is important because most people don't even know what commercial is. It's basically managing a relationship between companies. I think that's the easiest way to kind of water it down. That's what commercial agreements do. They create relationships between different companies. So I help do that. I also have, act as a business advisor as well because I have a background in business. So I can advise not only on the legal side, I understand the business ramifications of that. So that is my practice as a whole. And obviously there's the crypto Web3 element, which kind of gets spun into all of that, which is super fun. And Renno Co does all of these services. Plus we have a compliance and regulatory branch as well. So if you are in the Web3 and crypto space, then please feel free to hit us up.
Yeah, if you are listening and you also just want to follow somebody who obviously is knowledgeable and is a professional, you're an advisor, you're a lawyer, I think just a great person to follow in general if you're looking for some sort of connection or authority in the space. I'm not an authority in the space, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time today, Essa, and thank you everybody out there for listening. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Legal Connect podcast. We hope you found our conversation informative and helpful in navigating the process of hiring and working with a lawyer. Make the process of hiring a lawyer easier than ever and ensure the best match possible through our platform, lawtech.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.